Gunfire tore through the mountain air as Lieutenant Jack Sullivan pressed the blood-streaked radio transmitter to his face. The Korangal Valley of Afghanistan had turned into a death trap, swallowing his Delta Force team whole. Eagle 6 were surrounded, requesting immediate support. The response crackled through static. Negative whirlwind. Weather conditions prevent air support. You're on your own. A mortar shell landed 20 meters away, shaking the rocky outcrop where Sullivan had established his final position. 9 men lay behind the boulder, their faces caked with blood and dust ammunition, nearly spent. The smell of cordite and fear hung heavy in the mountain air. Sullivan, 40 years old, a former Navy SEAL reassigned to Delta Force, raised his Barrett M82 and peered through the scope at the advancing shadows. The Taliban fighters moved like ghosts through the mountain mist, using terrain with a familiarity born from generations of mountain warfare. "I count 16 rounds left," Sullivan said, his voice unnaturally calm despite death closing in from all sides. "And there must be over 200 of them." Staff Sergeant Frank Reynolds managed a grim smile despite the blood seeping from his shoulder wound. "Think we have a chance, Lieutenant?" Through his scope, Sullivan spotted movement, 3 fighters setting up a heavy machine gun position that would tear through their remaining cover within seconds. Without hesitation, he exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The first fighter dropped. Second shot. Another fell. Third shot. The machine gunner collapsed over his weapon. "How the hell did you make those shots in this wind?" Reynolds whispered, awe momentarily overriding his pain. Sullivan's weathered face softened for just a moment. His fingers unconsciously touched the worn Rolex Submariner on his wrist, a habit when facing impossible odds. "If I don't make it back, find my daughter." Before Reynolds could respond, Sullivan was gone, disappearing into the night with his rifle and a handful of ammunition. What happened in the next 6 hours would become classified legend within special operations communities. One man holding off an overwhelming enemy force. One man making impossible shots through darkness and driving rain. One man who would never return home, or so they were told. Fort Bragg stood under the golden light of an autumn morning 15 years later. The sprawling military installation hummed with activity, soldiers drilling on parade grounds, helicopters thumping overhead, the omnipresent sound of a base that had sent men to every American conflict since World War II. The Delta Force compound sat removed from this activity, a collection of nondescript buildings where America's most elite warriors trained in deliberate anonymity. Morgan Sullivan stepped from her weathered pickup truck, her eyes automatically scanning the compound with the assessment of someone trained to observe. 28 years old, her athletic frame carried no wasted motion as she collected her gear bag and the long case containing her Macmillan TAC 338 rifle. Her hazel eyes, her father's eyes, revealed nothing of her thoughts as she approached the security checkpoint. For a brief moment, her mind flashed back to her 13th birthday, the last time she saw her father alive. "Always be vigilant, Morgan," he'd told her, adjusting her grip on the hunting rifle. "Not just through the scope. Watch with everything you have." 2 weeks later, men in dress uniforms had appeared at their door with folded flags and rehearsed condolences. The guards studied her credentials with poorly disguised surprise. Women weren't unheard of at Fort Bragg, but they remained rare within the most elite units and completely absent from Delta Force's operational teams. "You're supposed to report to Colonel Hayes," the guards said, returning her ID. "Building 3, room 107. Morgan nodded without speaking. She had expected the scrutiny, the subtle evaluation. She had lived with it her entire military career, first at Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, then at Scout Sniper School, where she had been the first woman in the program's history. The weight of being first had become familiar, though never comfortable. Building 3 smelled of floor wax and gun oil, the universal scent of military command buildings worldwide. Morgan moved down the corridor, her footsteps echoing against walls lined with framed photographs from operations dating back to Vietnam. The faces of men from different eras stared out from behind glass Delta operators in Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, and places never officially acknowledged. Room 107's door stood open. Inside, Colonel Richard Hayes sat behind a desk reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a career officer. At 62, his frame remained solid, his close-cropped hair more salt than pepper. A Vietnam veteran who had risen through the ranks during America's longest wars, Hayes embodied the evolution of special operations from the shadow campaigns of the Cold War to the counterterrorism missions of the modern era. He didn't look up when Morgan entered, a deliberate power move she recognized immediately. "Sergeant First Class Sullivan reporting as ordered, sir." Hayes finally raised his eyes, studying her with undisguised skepticism. His face betrayed nothing, but his body language spoke volumes, shoulders slightly tensed, jaw tightened. The unconscious reactions of a man encountering something that challenged his established worldview. "At ease, Sergeant," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "I've reviewed your file. Marine Scouts, Sniper School, top of your class. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Distinguished Marksman medals." He paused, letting the silence build. "And now you've been assigned to Delta Force as what exactly the paperwork says, Advanced Marksmanship Specialist." The emphasis made clear his skepticism. Morgan remained expressionless, though a muscle in her arm tightened almost imperceptibly. She had expected this reception, had prepared for it, but preparation didn't make it easier. "I'm a sniper, sir," she said simply. "My orders are to integrate with Delta's operational planning team and provide expertise on precision fire tactics and training." Hayes leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "Delta Force doesn't need advisors on marksmanship, Sergeant. We have the finest shooters in the world. What we don't need is a social experiment forced on us by politicians who've never seen combat." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a dismissal wrapped in military courtesy. Morgan had heard variations of this speech throughout her career, from drill instructors, from fellow Marines, from men who couldn't reconcile her gender with her chosen profession. "With respect, sir, I'm not a social experiment. I'm a Marine with skills your unit requested." This wasn't strictly true. Her assignment had come through channels far above Delta's command structure, but she held Hayes' gaze without wavering. For a long moment, the colonel studied her, looking for weakness or uncertainty. Finding neither, he finally nodded curtly. "You'll be assigned to Alpha Team for evaluation. Your expertise will be noted." The emphasis made clear his skepticism. "Report to the range at 0700 tomorrow. Master Sergeant Reynolds will be your liaison." He returned his attention to his paperwork, a clear dismissal. Morgan rose, her face betraying nothing of her thoughts. "Yes, sir." As she turned to leave, Hayes spoke again, his voice carrying a new edge. "Sergeant Sullivan, this isn't the Marines. This isn't some training exercise where everyone gets a participation trophy. Delta operates at a standard few can meet. Gender doesn't matter here. Capability does. If you can't keep up, you'll be gone before the week's end." Morgan paused in the doorway, looking back over her shoulder. "Understood, sir." She found her assigned quarters, a Spartan room in the visiting personnel barracks, and unpacked methodically. Her possessions were few: uniforms, civilian clothes, toiletries, and her rifle case. The latter she placed carefully on the bed, unlocking it with practiced movements. The Macmillan TAC 338 nestled in custom-cut foam, its flat, dark earth finish worn in places from years of use. Morgan ran her fingers along the barrel, checking for imperfections, with the unconscious habit of someone whose life had depended on this tool. The rifle had been her constant companion through 3 combat tours, an extension of herself in ways non-shooters could never understand. She removed a small leather notebook from her bag, its pages dog-eared and filled with handwritten ballistics tables, wine calculations, and observation notes. Between the technical data were snippets of poetry, Tennyson, mostly her father's favorite. She turned to a passage marked with a faded red tab. "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." The words had been Jack Sullivan's mantra, a philosophy that had guided him through special forces, selection through the elite scout sniper program, through countless classified operations across 4 continents. Morgan had adopted the same words as her own, a connection to the father who had vanished into the mountains of Afghanistan when she was 13. From her wallet, she removed a worn photograph, her father kneeling beside her 11-year-old self after her first successful deer hunt. His eyes, the same hazel as hers, reflected pride, but something else too: watchfulness. Even in that moment of achievement, Jack Sullivan had been scanning the horizon, alert to threats unseen by others. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She slipped the photo back into her wallet and closed the rifle case before answering. Master Sergeant William Bill Garrison stood in the hallway, his lean frame stooped slightly with age, but still radiating the unmistakable presence of a lifetime operator. At 65, his weathered face mapped decades of service from Vietnam to the War on Terror. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in Morgan with a single glance. "Sergeant Sullivan," he said, his voice carrying the slight gravel of a longtime smoker. I'm Garrison, range master here. Thought I'd check in, see if you're settling in all right. Morgan nodded, studying the old soldier with careful neutrality. Yes, sir, all squared away. Garrison's eyes flickered to the rifle case on her bed, then back to her face. Something unreadable passed across his features. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. That's a TAC 338, he said. Custom stock. Yes, sir, adjusted for my frame. Better cheek weld. Garrison nodded, a veteran's appreciation for specialized equipment. You've used it in combat. 3 tours Afghanistan. A silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken language of soldiers who had seen the same landscapes, fought the same enemies, carried the same burdens. Colonel Hayes is old school, Garrison said finally. Came up through the ranks when special operations was an all-male domain. He's a good officer, but change comes hard to men like him. Morgan's expression remained neutral. I'm not here to change anything, Master Sergeant. Just to do my job. Garrison studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The range tomorrow, 0700. Bring your weapon and full kit. He turned to leave, then paused, his eyes dropping to Morgan's wrist. That watch you're wearing, military issue. Morgan glanced down at the battered Rolex Submariner on her wrist, its face scratched but functional, the band worn from years of use. It was my father's. Something flickered in Garrison's eyes. Recognition, then a carefully controlled reaction. Thought it looked familiar. Good night, Sergeant. As Garrison walked away, Morgan closed the door, her mind racing. The old sergeant's reaction to her watch had been subtle but unmistakable. She turned her wrist, studying the timepiece that had been among her father's personal effects, returned to her mother after his death. The back bore a simple engraving, always vigilant. Dawn painted the sky in bands of crimson and gold as Morgan moved through her morning preparations. She had risen at 0500, completed her physical training, a 5-mile run, followed by strength exercises, and prepared for the day ahead with the disciplined routine of a career Marine. The Delta Force shooting range complex sprawled across several acres of cleared land, bordered by dense forests that absorbed sound and ensured privacy. Unlike the standard military ranges Morgan had trained on throughout her career, this facility featured advanced target systems, irregular terrain features, and shooting positions designed to simulate real-world environments, from urban settings to mountain ridgelines. Master Sergeant Garrison waited at the entrance, his lean frame silhouetted against the morning light. He nodded in greeting eyes, noting her punctuality 15 minutes early, the unspoken standard for professional soldiers. Morning, Sergeant Sullivan. You'll be on lane 3 today. Colonel Hayes wants to observe your baseline capabilities. Morgan nodded, understanding the subtext. This would be no ordinary evaluation, but a high-stakes demonstration of her worth to skeptical observers. Yes, Master Sergeant. She followed Garrison past several lanes where Delta operators were already engaged in morning training, executing rapid-fire drills, with handguns working through close-quarters battle scenarios with short-barreled rifles. The men paused briefly as she passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. She felt their eyes tracking her, assessing, judging. Lane 3 was a long-range precision course stretching from 300 to 1,200 meters, with steel targets positioned at irregular intervals across varying terrain. A shooting platform offered different firing positions, prone, kneeling, seated, and standing, each presenting unique challenges for the sniper. Colonel Hayes stood nearby, speaking with a group of operators. His eyes narrowed slightly as Morgan approached his conversation, falling silent. Sergeant Sullivan, he acknowledged with minimal courtesy, since you've been assigned as our expert, I'd like to see what you bring to my unit. Master Sergeant Garrison will run you through our standard qualification course. Morgan set down her equipment, noting that other men had stopped their own training to observe. The scrutiny didn't bother Arshwamanizer. She had performed under much worse conditions, but she recognized the moment for what it was, a public test designed to establish her place in the unit's hierarchy. She opened her rifle case with practiced efficiency, assembling her weapon with movements honed through thousands of repetitions. The Macmillan TAC 338 came together under her hands like a living thing, awakening each component fitted with precision. Garrison watched her preparations with professional interest, his eyes catching a detail that made him pause. That's an unusual way to check headspace. Morgan's fingers hesitated almost imperceptibly before continuing in their work. The technique, pressing the bolt forward with specific finger placement while simultaneously checking tension on the extractor, was indeed uncommon, a method she had learned from her father rather than from formal training. Old habit, she replied simply. Garrison's eyes lingered on her hands a moment longer before he nodded. The course is 12 stages, different positions, distances from 300 to 200 meters. Winds coming from the northwest at about 12 knots, gusting to 20. Morgan glanced toward the tree line, observing the way the pine branches moved in the morning breeze, mentally calculating wind variables and their effect on ballistics at different ranges. Her eyes caught the barely visible mirage effect rising from the warming ground, another indicator of wind conditions that most shooters missed. "I'm ready when you are, Master Sergeant." Garrison handed her a magazine loaded with match-grade .338 Lapua Magnum rounds. First stage is prone position, 3 targets at 500 meters. Fire when ready. Morgan settled into position, her body forming a stable platform for the rifle. She adjusted her scope, making minute corrections for elevation and windage based on her mental calculations. Her breathing slowed, automatically falling into the measured rhythm she had practiced since childhood. Inhale. Slight hold. Gentle exhale. Pause. Between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Through her scope, Morgan watched the first target react, the steel plate swinging backward from a perfect center hit. Without shifting position, she acquired the second target, adjusted fractionally for a subtle wind shift, and fired again. Second hit dead center. The third followed with the same precision. 3 shots, 3 hits, all within a 3-inch group at 500 meters. She was aware of the silence behind her, could feel the intensity of observation from Hayes and his men. Morgan remained focused, transitioning smoothly to the next stage. Kneeling position targets at 700 meters. Again, perfection. Each shot placed with surgical precision, despite the less stable shooting position and increasing distance. The morning progressed through increasingly difficult scenarios. Seated position with crosswinds. Standing shots at medium range. Moving targets at varying speeds. Each challenge met with the same methodical excellence, each bullet finding its mark with uncanny consistency. When they reached the extreme long-range portion, targets at 1,000 meters and beyond, Garrison handed her a different magazine. "Standard issue ammunition for this stage," he said, his voice neutral, but his eyes watchful. Morgan understood immediately. The ammunition was deliberately mismatched to her rifle, a test within a test, forcing her to compensate for suboptimal ballistic performance. She accepted the magazine without comment, making mental adjustments to her calculations. At the firing line, she settled again into position, this time taking longer to prepare. The extreme distance magnified any errors in technique or judgment, and the inferior ammunition added another layer of complexity. Her first shot struck the 1,000-meter target slightly off-center, a good hit by any standard but short of her previous precision. Morgan frowned slightly, making a minute adjustment to her scope. Her second shot found the center of the target. "Wind shifted," she explained quietly. "Approximately 3 miles per hour from 11 o'clock. Garrison raised his binoculars, studying the distant terrain between firing position and target. There were no visible indicators of the wind change Morgan had detected, and compensated for no movement in vegetation, no dust, nothing that would alert an ordinary shooter. "How did you read that?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Mirage shift in the lower third of the field," Morgan replied, her eyes still at the scope. "And the way sound is carrying from the east range." Garrison lowered his binoculars, his weathered face impossible to read. But something had changed in his assessment, a professional recognition that transcended gender or background. The final stage was the most challenging, a target at 200 meters, positioned so that the bullet would have to pass through a narrow gap between 2 obstacles, with swirling winds created by the surrounding terrain features. Even experienced Delta snipers considered it a low percentage shot. Morgan studied the scenario carefully, taking extra time to read the complex wind patterns. She adjusted her position slightly, finding the optimal angle. When she finally fired, the shot threaded the narrow gap and struck the target dead center. A perfect hit on what many considered an impossible shot. She rose from the prone position, her face composed despite the remarkable performance she had just delivered. Colonel Hayes approached, his expression unreadable. "Impressive shooting, Sergeant." He acknowledged the admission, clearly costing him some effort. But hitting targets on a known distance range is a far cry from combat conditions. "Yes, sir." Morgan met his gaze evenly. Hayes studied her for a moment, searching for weakness or uncertainty. Finding neither, he turned to Garrison. Set up the Scorpion run for tomorrow. Let's see how our expert performs under more dynamic conditions. As Hayes walked away, Garrison remained watching Morgan clean her rifle with practiced efficiency. The Scorpion run is our most difficult evaluation course, he said quietly. 12 moving targets at varying distances, unpredictable wind conditions, limited time. The current record is 8 minutes 12 seconds, held by our best shooter. Morgan nodded, continuing her methodical breakdown of the weapon. I'll be ready, Master Sergeant. Garrison hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on his mind all morning. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Sergeant Sullivan? Morgan's hands stilled for just a moment, her eyes fixed on the disassembled rifle before her. My father taught me. Started when I was 7 years old. Your father, Garrison repeated, his voice carefully neutral. He was military and special forces, scout sniper. She continued, cleaning her movements, precise and economical. Died in Afghanistan, Operation Whirlwind. Garrison's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of his posture, a momentary widening of his eyes before his features returned to professional neutrality. I see, he said, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. 0700 tomorrow then, Yule kit including sidearm. In the afternoon, Morgan was studying the layout of the Scorpion run course when she noticed a man watching her from a distance. Master Sergeant Frank Reynolds, mid-50s, with the compact build of a career operator and eyes that missed nothing. He approached with the measured confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Sergeant Sullivan, he said by way of introduction. Frank Reynolds, I hear you put on quite a show this morning. Morgan nodded, maintaining professional courtesy. Just doing my job, Master Sergeant. Reynolds studied her face with an intensity that went beyond casual interest. That TAC 338, you've made some interesting modifications to it. Custom trigger, 2-stage set at 2.5 pounds. I adjusted it myself. He nodded appreciatively. You know your weapon. That's good. His eyes dropped to her wrist. That's an interesting watch. Rolex Submariner, old model. Don't see many of those around anymore. Morgan glanced down at her father's watch. It was my father's. Something changed in Reynolds' eyes, a flash of recognition, followed by what looked almost like fear. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak, as if seeing a ghost. Your father, he began, then stopped abruptly. Sullivan, Jack Sullivan was your father. The question carried weight beyond a simple inquiry. Morgan felt a surge of adrenaline, but kept her expression neutral. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Jack Sullivan, Delta Force. He was killed in Operation Whirlwind, Afghanistan, 2008. Reynolds' face went pale. His hand moved unconsciously to his right shoulder, the location of the wound he had suffered in that very operation. Morgan realized with sudden clarity. This man had been there, had been with her father in those final hours. I knew him, Reynolds said finally, his voice carefully controlled. He was a good man, one of the best I ever served with. You were there, Morgan said. Not a question. Reynolds nodded, once his eyes never leaving her face. I was. He saved my life. Saved all of us. He hesitated, then added, that watch, he never took it off. Said it was his good luck charm. Always vigilant, Morgan said, turning the watch to reveal the engraving on the back. Reynolds stared at the engraving, then back at Morgan's face. You look like him. Same eyes. He seemed about to say something more, then thought better of it. The Scorpion run tomorrow, it's designed to be nearly impossible. No one's ever completed it in under 8 minutes except me. I heard, Morgan replied evenly. Good luck, Sergeant Sullivan. Reynolds turned to leave, then stopped. Your father was the best shooter I ever saw, until today. Dawn the next morning brought a crowd to the Scorpion run course, operator support staff, even administrative personnel, drawn by word of mouth about the Marine female sniper who had matched the best Delta shooters. Colonel Hayes stood with arms crossed, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Garrison supervised the final course preparations with meticulous attention to detail. The Scorpion run spread across a quarter-mile of varied terrain, wooded sections, open areas, elevation changes, and artificial structures, creating a complex environment for precision shooting. 12 automated targets would appear at random intervals at distances from 300 to 1,000 meters, each visible for only seconds before disappearing. Garrison approached as Morgan completed her final equipment check. Course is ready. 12 targets, no set sequence, variable exposure times. The clock starts when you cross the line and stops when you engage the final target or exceed the 15-minute limit. Morgan nodded. Understood. Most shooters don't complete all 12 targets, Garrison added. No shame in that. This course was designed to push beyond normal operational parameters. Morgan checked her ammunition one final time, then closed the action on her rifle. I'm ready. Hayes raised a hand, then dropped it sharply. Begin. Morgan crossed the starting line at a measured pace, not sprinting, but moving with the calculated efficiency of someone who understood that endurance mattered more than initial speed. She reached the first firing position just as the first target appeared at approximately 400 meters, partially obscured by foliage. In one fluid motion, she dropped to a kneeling position, acquired the target through her scope, calculated wind and elevation, and fired. The target dropped an instant later, a perfect hit. Without pause, she was moving again, navigating the uneven terrain while scanning for the next target. It appeared to her left at nearly 600 meters, moving laterally at moderate speed. She established a prone position, tracked the movement, and fired. Another hit. The pattern continued: move, engage, confirm, move again. Each shot a demonstration of skills honed through years of dedicated practice and combat experience. She worked with machine-like efficiency, but there was something more in her performance, an almost supernatural awareness of where targets would appear before they became visible, an intuitive understanding of how the bullet would travel through complex air currents. By the sixth target, a murmur had spread through the watching crowd. They were witnessing something extraordinary, shooting that transcended conventional marksmanship and entered the realm of art. Morgan's pace never slackened. Her focus never wavered. Each target acquired, each shot placed with surgical precision, each hit confirmed by the distinctive sound of bullet meeting steel. The final target appeared at extreme range, 1,000 meters, moving rapidly across the field of fire. Morgan tracked smoothly, her breathing synchronized with its movement, her trigger finger applying pressure with micrometric precision. The shot broke cleanly and the target dropped an instant later. Silence fell over the range. Morgan rose from her position, her face composed, despite the remarkable demonstration she had just delivered. Garrison stepped forward, checking his stopwatch. 3 minutes, 28 seconds, he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly still range. New course record. The silence that followed was profound, the collective processing of dozens of elite warriors witnessing a paradigm shift in their understanding of what was possible. Then slowly Reynolds stepped forward and extended his hand to Morgan. Outstanding shooting, Marine, he said, genuine respect in his voice. Never seen anything like it. Others followed, professional soldiers acknowledging exceptional skill, regardless of gender or background. Only Hayes remained apart, his expression unreadable, as he observed the spontaneous recognition of Morgan's capabilities. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a black SUV bearing military plates. It stopped near the range, and the driver quickly moved to open the rear door. The man who emerged carried himself with the unmistakable authority of flag rank, tall, silver-haired, with the weathered features of someone who had commanded men in combat across decades of service. General Blackwood, Hayes said, surprise evident in his voice as he moved to greet the newcomer. Lieutenant General Walter Blackwood, Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, returned Hayes' salute with practiced precision. His pale blue eyes surveyed the range before settling on Morgan with unsettling intensity. Colonel Hayes, Blackwood acknowledged. I was in the area and thought I'd observe your evaluation course. The casual explanation rang false. Generals didn't simply drop by training exercises without purpose. Blackwood approached Morgan, studying her with the calculating assessment of a man accustomed to evaluating both personnel and strategic situations. Sergeant Sullivan, he said, using her name without introduction. Impressive demonstration. Morgan came to attention. Thank you, sir. Blackwood's gaze lingered on her face, then shifted to the rifle she held. Macmillan TAC 338. Interesting choice for this course. Most shooters would opt for something with a faster cycle time. I prefer accuracy over volume, sir, Morgan replied. A thin smile crossed Blackwood's face. Just like your father. The words landed with deliberate weight, a test disguised as casual observation. Morgan's expression remained neutral, though Reynolds, standing nearby, noticed the slight tightening of her grip on her rifle. You knew my father, sir? Blackwood nodded slowly. I knew Jack Sullivan. one of the finest snipers in Special Forces history. He glanced at Hayes. "Colonel, I'd like a word with Sergeant Sullivan in private." Hayes hesitated, clearly surprised by the request, then nodded curtly. "My office is available, sir." "That won't be necessary," Blackwood replied. "We'll use my vehicle." Inside Blackwood's climate-controlled SUV, Morgan sat across from the silver-haired general, acutely aware of the isolation created by the vehicle's tinted windows. "Your performance today was exceptional," Blackwood began, "but not surprising given your lineage." Morgan remained silent, waiting. She'd expected scrutiny after breaking the Scorpion Run course record, but not direct intervention from JSOC's deputy commander. "How much do you know about Operation Whirlwind?" Blackwood asked, watching her reaction. "Only what was in the official report, sir," Morgan replied carefully. "My father was attached to a Delta Force team in the Karangal Valley. Their position was compromised. He provided covering fire that allowed 9 operators to reach the extraction point. He was killed in action." Blackwood's pale blue eyes never left her face. "That's the official version." The implication hung in the air between them. There was another version, unacknowledged and classified. "Is there another version, sir?" "Why are you here, Sergeant Sullivan?" Blackwood countered. "Your record shows a promising career in the Marines. Scout Sniper School honors graduate. Multiple combat deployments. Yet you requested this lateral transfer to a position that didn't exist until recently." The question targeted the heart of her cover story. Morgan had rehearsed this response many times. "I wanted to work with the best, sir. Delta Force represents the pinnacle of special operations." "A commendable career move," Blackwood replied, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word of it. "But unusual timing. Wouldn't you say 15 years after your father's death, you suddenly develop an interest in the unit he died saving?" Morgan met his gaze directly. "My interest isn't sudden, sir. It's been a long-term goal." A thin smile crossed Blackwood's face. "You have your father's eyes, Sergeant, and his gift for marksmanship." He leaned forward slightly. "What I'm curious about is whether you also inherited his unique perspective on certain matters." The conversation had entered dangerous territory. Morgan maintained her composed exterior while her mind raced to analyze the general's words. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." "Your father had concerns about certain operations toward the end of his career, concerns he shared with some of his colleagues." Blackwood paused. "Did he ever discuss those concerns with you?" "No, sir. My father rarely discussed his work at home." Blackwood nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. He reached into his jacket and removed a business card containing only his name and a direct line phone number. No official insignia, no office details. "If you have any questions during your assignment, here, feel free to contact me directly." As the SUV slowed near the range, Blackwood placed a hand lightly on Morgan's forearm. "Your call sign during this assignment will be Nighthawk." A jolt of recognition shot through Morgan's system. Nighthawk, the very project her father had mentioned in his private journal before his death. She maintained her neutral expression, giving nothing away. "Understood, sir." Back in her quarters, Morgan secured the door before removing her father's leather journal from its hiding place. She re-examined the pages where Jack Sullivan had scrawled cryptic notes about something called Project Nighthawk. The entries were vague, written in a personal shorthand that revealed little to anyone who didn't know the context. One entry, dated 3 weeks before Operation Whirlwind, read, "NHawk parameters exceeded again. Command aware but unwilling to intervene. Ethical considerations dismissed as impractical during active operations." Another, dated just days before his final mission, "Evidence compiled. 3 sources confirm unauthorized continuation despite executive order termination. Briefing package prepared for Senate Oversight Committee." The implications were clear. Her father had been investigating something called Nighthawk, something that concerned him deeply, something potentially illegal or unethical. Had this investigation led to his death in those Afghan mountains? Was the official story of heroic sacrifice covering a darker truth? And now Blackwood had deliberately assigned her the call sign Nighthawk. Not a coincidence. A message. But what kind of message, and to what end? That evening, Morgan followed Reynolds to the communications building, maintaining distance and using shadows for concealment, as her father had taught her. Outside the building, Reynolds spoke quietly into a secure phone, his back to the wall. eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. She's here. Sullivan's daughter. Has his watch and shoots exactly like him. No, I'm certain. Same techniques, same precision. Yes, she's been assigned to Alpha Team. Nevada deployment next week. Blackwood spoke with her privately. Call sign Nighthawk. Yes, that's right. They're using Nighthawk. I understand. I'll keep watching. As Reynolds ended his call and moved away, Morgan remained motionless in the shadows, her mind processing the implications of what she just heard. Reynolds knew something significant about her father, something connected to her shooting abilities, something that warranted immediate reporting through channels outside normal military communication. The mystery deepened, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Jack Sullivan's legacy was far more complex than a heroic last stand in the mountains of Afghanistan. And Morgan was now at the center of whatever her father had begun 15 years ago, a mission that apparently remained active long after his reported death. She returned to her quarters undetected, the weight of her father's watch heavy on her wrist. The engraving, always vigilant, seemed to pulse with renewed purpose. Whatever truth lay buried beneath layers of classification and deliberate concealment, Morgan was closer than ever to uncovering it. Always vigilant, always watching, always moving toward the moment when justice would finally be served and truth revealed. The desert air shimmered with heat as the military transport touched down on the Nevada airstrip. Morgan Sullivan felt the change in pressure as the aircraft's wheels made contact with the runway, a momentary sensation that matched the subtle shift in her mission. Fort Bragg had been about establishing credentials. Nevada would be about finding answers. Through the small window, she observed the sprawling complex, a collection of low-lying structures spread across the barren landscape, surrounded by security perimeters and observation towers. Unlike most military installations, this one bore no obvious markings, no flags proudly displaying unit designations. This was a place designed to remain anonymous, a facility whose very existence was classified. Alpha teams sat around her in the aircraft's belly, each operator preparing in their own way for the 2-week deployment. Reynolds watched Morgan with careful assessment, his intelligence officer's instincts sensing something beneath her composed exterior. "First time at the Nevada facility?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes watchful. Morgan nodded. "You've been before." "3 times, Reynolds replied. "Interesting place, more than just a training site." He paused, watching her reaction. "Sections even Delta operators don't access without special clearance." "I'm focused on the training scenarios," she said. "On high-altitude shooting in desert conditions presents unique challenges." The aircraft touched down on a remote airstrip. As Alpha Team disembarked, Morgan noted the security measures with professional assessment. Motion sensors disguised as natural features. Surveillance cameras hidden within rock formations. Armed personnel maintaining discreet coverage of all approaches. A small convoy of desert-modified tactical vehicles awaited them, led by a weathered officer whose ramrod posture and watchful eyes marked him as career special operations despite the silver streaking his close-cropped hair. Major James Hayes bore little physical resemblance to his brother, the colonel, but carried the same air of contained authority. A prominent scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and he walked with the slight unevenness of someone who had recovered from a serious leg wound. Morgan recognized the hallmarks of injuries consistent with those documented in the Whirlwind after-action reports. "Welcome to Nevada," he said, shaking hands with Reynolds' Alpha Team's commander. "Your equipment arrived yesterday, all accounted for and secured in your assigned quarters." As Hayes exchanged brief words with each team member, Morgan studied him with careful assessment, noting the subtle signs of old injuries in his movement, the slight stiffness in his right shoulder, the barely perceptible unevenness in his gait. Wounds from Operation Whirlwind. When Hayes reached her, his eyes narrowed slightly in recognition of her name. "Sergeant Sullivan, you've made quite an impression at Fort Bragg, breaking the Scorpion Run record on your first attempt." "Thank you, sir," Morgan replied, maintaining professional courtesy while searching his face for any reaction to her paternal connection. "You'll find our desert conditions present unique challenges for precision shooting," he continued. "Extreme temperature variations, unpredictable wind patterns, mirage effects that can deceive even experienced marksmen." His assessment was professional, but carried a subtle edge of challenge. "We'll see if your skills translate to this environment." The convoy moved through the desert following a barely visible track that wound between rocky outcroppings and across dried lake beds. After 30 minutes, they crested a ridge overlooking a complex far larger than standard training facilities. Multiple buildings spread across the desert floor, some clearly designed for tactical exercises, others bearing the anonymous architecture of classified research installations. The latter structures were separated from the main complex by additional security checkpoints, their windows tinted against outside observation. "Welcome to Advanced Training Facility Nevada," Hayes announced as they descended toward the main gate. Alpha Team was assigned quarters in a modern barracks near the training ranges. Hayes outlined the deployment schedule with military precision, describing scenarios of increasing complexity, culminating in a 3-day exercise requiring extended surveillance and precision engagement from extreme distances. "General Blackwood will be arriving tomorrow to observe portions of your training." Hayes concluded, his eyes briefly meeting Morgan's. He has particular interest in the integration of precision fire support with direct action elements. As evening approached after the first day's orientation exercises, Morgan left the team quarters for a run. The path wound through perimeter sections of the installation, providing her with the opportunity to survey the facility layout while maintaining the appearance of routine physical training. As she rounded an elevated section of trail, Morgan observed a restricted area previously hidden from general visibility, a separate compound with enhanced security measures, medical transport vehicles, and distinctive architecture suggesting research rather than training functions. She maintained steady pace while conducting professional assessment, noting access points, guard rotations, surveillance systems, covering all approaches to the secured area. The facility matched the vague descriptions she'd found in her father's journal references to a medical component of Project Nighthawk. As she completed her run and returned toward team quarters, Morgan noted a black SUV parked near the administration building, the same distinctive vehicle Blackwood had used at Fort Bragg. Its presence confirmed the general's involvement extended beyond initial contact to continuing oversight of her deployment and activities at the Nevada facility. Inside her quarters, Morgan reviewed her mental map of the complex, identifying potential routes to the restricted medical area. The assignment here was proving more fruitful than she had dared hope. Not only was the facility real, but its configuration matched her father's cryptic notes. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly composed herself before answering. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the hallway, her posture suggesting an informal visit rather than official business. At 45, Chen carried herself with the quiet confidence of an intelligence officer who had seen enough to be permanently wary. "Sergeant Sullivan," Chen said. "Thought I'd check in, see how you're settling in." "All good, Captain. Thank you." Chen nodded, her eyes subtly scanning the room. "First time in Nevada." "Yes, ma'am." "It can be disorienting. The desert has a way of altering perceptions." Chen's emphasis on the last word seemed deliberate. "Mind if I come in for a moment?" Morgan stepped aside, allowing Chen into the room. The intelligence officer closed the door behind her, then lowered her voice. "I'd like to speak candidly, if I may. Off the record." Morgan maintained her neutral expression, but felt a surge of alertness. "Of course, ma'am." Chen moved to the window, positioning herself to prevent lip reading from potential observers outside. "Before we discuss Alpha Team's assignments, I'd like to address something personal." Her tone shifted from professional to more intimate. "My father served as a military surgeon. He was assigned to the field hospital in Bagram when they brought in the survivors from Operation Whirlwind." Morgan felt her pulse quicken, but kept her face composed. Chen was deliberately establishing a connection to the very operation that had claimed her father's life. He noticed something unusual about their wounds. Chen continued, watching Morgan's reaction. Men who should have died from their injuries were recovering at rates that defied medical explanation. When he documented his observations and raised questions through official channels, he was reassigned to McMurdo Station in Antarctica. His career effectively ended. The pattern matched what Morgan had pieced together from her father's notes. Medical anomalies, questions raised, careers destroyed. "I'm sorry to hear that, Captain, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." Chen's eyes held Morgan's with unwavering intensity. "Because I think you're here for reasons beyond advanced marksmanship training. And because I believe those reasons might align with my own interests." The statement hung in the air between them, a dangerous admission from an intelligence officer, a potential alliance, or an elaborate trap. "Captain, I'm a Marine assigned to share sniper tactics with Delta Force. That's all." Chen smiled slightly. You're good, Sullivan. Very good. But there's more to this facility than training ranges. She moved closer, lowering her voice further. The restricted area you observed during your run this evening, it's called Section 4, official designation, Advanced Medical Research Division. Unofficially, it's where they keep the successes. Morgan maintained her neutral expression despite the jolt of recognition. Section 4, the designation mentioned in her father's journal in connection with Project Nighthawk. Successes, she asked, allowing a hint of confusion. Subjects who responded positively to the experimental protocols, Chen replied, including some who were officially declared killed in action years ago. The implication was unmistakable. Chen was suggesting that soldiers reported dead were being held in the restricted section of the facility. Soldiers like Jack Sullivan. That's a serious allegation, Captain. It's not an allegation, it's a fact. Chen's expression hardened. My father paid for discovering that fact with his career. I've spent 7 years gathering evidence, working my way into positions that would give me access. And now, just as I get close, they send you Jack Sullivan's daughter with his shooting abilities, his watch, even the same techniques for checking headspace on a rifle. Morgan felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Chen knew. Somehow she knew everything. I don't know what you're implying. Stop, Chen interrupted. We don't have time for this dance. Major Hayes has authorized your access to the historical archives tomorrow night. Section 12, Level B. It's unprecedented for a visiting specialist to receive that clearance. Someone wants you to find something. She handed Morgan a small data card. If you're looking for the truth about Operation Whirlwind, start with these file numbers. Morgan took the card, her mind racing to assess this unexpected development. Was Chen truly an ally? Or was this an elaborate counterintelligence operation designed to expose her true purpose? Why would you help me? Morgan asked, deciding direct questioning was her best approach. Because if what I suspect is true, my father's career wasn't the only casualty of Project Nighthawk. And because, after 7 years, I'm running out of options. Chen moved toward the door. Major Hayes is watching you closely. So is Reynolds. Be careful who you trust. As Chen departed, Morgan stood motionless, processing the implications of their exchange. The intelligence officer had just provided confirmation of her father's possible survival and offered direct assistance in accessing classified information. Either Chen was a genuine ally in her search for the truth, or Morgan had just walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. Dawn brought a new training, exercise, long-range engagement in desert conditions. The Alpha Team briefing included detailed weather reports, temperature expected to reach 110 degrees, winds gusting to 30 knots, humidity below 10%. Optimal shooting conditions, these were not. Morgan established her position on a rocky outcropping overlooking the firing range. The heat rose in visible waves from the desert floor, creating mirage effects that distorted target visibility. Even experienced snipers would struggle to compensate for these conditions. Her first target appeared at 800 meters, a steel silhouette, barely visible through the heat haze. Morgan calculated the complex variables: temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, spin drift, Coriolis effect. She settled her breathing, found the rhythm between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The distinctive ping of lead on steel confirmed her hit. Center mass, Reynolds reported through the radio. Impressive compensation for mirage effect. Morgan transitioned to the next target, more than 100 meters, with crosswinds created by the surrounding terrain features. Again, she adjusted, calculated, and fired. Another hit. By the fifth target, when 500 meters in conditions that rendered conventional marksmanship nearly impossible, a small crowd had gathered behind her position. She could feel their collective assessment, the professional recognition of abilities that transcended standard training. Final target, Reynolds announced. 800 meters, moving laterally at approximately 5 miles per hour. Through her scope, Morgan could barely discern the target through the shimmering heat waves. The distance exceeded the effective range of most snipers under optimal conditions, let alone in desert heat with gusting winds. This wasn't a test of skill. It was a test of whether she possessed the same uncanny abilities as her father. She made her calculations, factoring in the target's movement, the wind's effect on the bullet's trajectory over such an extreme distance, the temperature's impact on ballistics. When she fired, the shot felt right, the clean break of the trigger, the precise reset of the rifle against her shoulder. 3 seconds later, the time it took for the bullet to travel the extreme distance, the target reacted with a solid hit. A murmur rippled through the observers. Reynolds approached, kneeling beside her position. "How the hell did you make that shot?" he asked, echoing the words he had spoken to her father 15 years earlier in Afghanistan. Morgan met his gaze. Mirage shift patterns in the lower quadrant. Wind correction based on dust movement at the 1-200-meter mark. Reynolds studied her face recognition and something like fear in his eyes. "Your father was the only person I ever saw who could read conditions like that. Said he could feel the wind changes before they happen." The deliberate reference to Jack Sullivan's abilities created an opening Morgan couldn't ignore. "You knew him well." Reynolds glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "He saved my life in Afghanistan, Operation Whirlwind." His hand moved unconsciously to his right shoulder, where Morgan knew he had been wounded. "9 of us survived because of him. 37 confirmed kills in impossible conditions. No one could explain how he made those shots. The official report said he was killed covering your extraction," Morgan said, watching Reynolds' reaction carefully. Something flickered in the older man's eyes, a momentary hesitation, a calculation. "That's what they told us. Body never recovered. Posthumous Silver Star." He paused. "Your shooting today, it's not just similar to his, it's identical. Same techniques, same instinctive adjustments. It's like watching a ghost." The comparison hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that Morgan's abilities extended beyond conventional explanation, just as her father's had. Before she could respond, Major Hayes approached their position. "Exceptional shooting, Sergeant Sullivan," he said, his tone professionally appreciative but his eyes calculating. "General Blackwood just arrived. He'd like to observe tomorrow's night operation personally." Reynolds rose, assuming a more formal posture in the presence of a superior officer. "Sergeant Sullivan's performance exceeded all expectations, sir, particularly the 1-800-meter engagement." Hayes nodded, his gaze shifting between Reynolds and Morgan. "So I saw, very reminiscent of another shooter I once knew." The comment seemed deliberately provocative, testing for a reaction. "Section 12 access has been authorized for 2100 hours tonight, Sergeant. Historical archives related to advanced marksmanship techniques might be valuable for your professional development." "Thank you, sir," Morgan replied, maintaining her neutral expression despite the surge of anticipation. This was the access Chen had mentioned, the opportunity to search for records of her father in Project Nighthawk. As Hayes walked away, Reynolds gave Morgan a long, assessing look. "Be careful in the archives," he said quietly. Then, leaning closer, he added in a barely audible whisper, "I've been reporting on you to Blackwood because he ordered me to, but I'm beginning to think I'm on the wrong side of this. We need to talk. Later." Morgan nodded almost imperceptibly, recognizing the significance of Reynolds' admission. The man who had been reporting her movements was now questioning his own role. At precisely 2100 hours, Morgan approached Building 7, a secure structure with enhanced protection measures. Her credentials underwent verification at multiple checkpoints, each authorization specifically limited to Section 12 on Level B for a designated 2-hour period. Level B presented a stark contrast to the desert environment above climate-controlled corridors, with subdued lighting, specialized air filtration systems, the ambient hum of advanced electronic equipment. Section 12 proved to be an archival repository containing physical documents alongside secure computer terminals for accessing digitized records. A civilian archivist verified Morgan's authorization before explaining the system's organization. "Materials related to special operations in the Afghanistan theater are in subsection 7A. Physical documents in the secured cabinets, digital records accessible through these terminals. Your authorization permits viewing, but not copying or removal of any materials." Once alone in the archival section, Morgan inserted Chen's data card into her pocket computer, retrieving the file numbers the intelligence officer had provided. She began systematic exploration of the Operation Whirlwind records, establishing a pattern of reasonable investigation for anyone monitoring her activities. The unredacted after-action reports confirmed details Reynolds had shared. During their brief exchanges, the Delta team ambushed in a narrow pass communications jammed extraction initially impossible. Her father providing extraordinary covering fire that allowed eventual rescue of 9 severely wounded operators. Morgan noted with professional interest that the intelligence justifying the operation had come through channels connected to elements within the CIA associated with specialized research programs, a connection suggesting deliberate setup to create circumstances where her father would be forced to demonstrate extraordinary capabilities under combat conditions. Moving deeper into the archives, she accessed medical records for the Whirlwind survivors, focusing initially on James Hayes as the most severely wounded. The clinical documentation confirmed Chen's assessment injuries that should have been fatal treatment protocols that diverged from standard military medical procedures, recovery timelines that defied conventional understanding. Deeper within Hayes's medical file, Morgan found references to Protocol Nighthawk and enhanced recovery parameters, alongside technical data on neurological patterns, genetic markers, and physiological modifications described as performance optimization. The documentation confirmed beyond doubt that James Hayes had received unauthorized enhancements during his recovery modifications connected to the program her father had been investigating before Operation Whirlwind. Similar patterns appeared in medical records of all 9 survivors, though with variations in specific procedures and enhancement levels based on individual genetic profiles and injury patterns. As she approached the final 30 minutes of her authorized access period, Morgan shifted to the most sensitive components, searching for any reference to her father beyond his reported death during the extraction. The official documentation maintained the narrative of heroic sacrifice, but certain anomalies appeared in supplementary reports references to asset recovery operations conducted 12 hours after primary extraction. Specialized medical teams deployed to the region transport protocols requiring unusual security measures. In a classified appendix dated 3 days after Whirlwind, Morgan found what she had been seeking: a medical intake report for subject JS-7734, transferred from field medical facilities in Afghanistan to a specialized research installation in Germany. The documentation included initial assessment of gunshot wounds, environmental exposure, and physical exhaustion consistent with her father's last known condition. Most significantly, the report noted, subject demonstrated capabilities beyond established operational parameters during extended engagement with superior forces. Genetic markers suggest natural predisposition toward enhanced performance characteristics. Recommended for Protocol Nighthawk Phase 3 evaluation following stabilization. The confirmation sent a surge of focused energy through Morgan's system. Her father had indeed survived. Whirlwind had been captured by Nighthawk recovery teams, had been transported to specialized facilities for evaluation connected to enhanced capabilities he had demonstrated during combat. She continued searching for subsequent documentation, finding transfer records showing subject JS-7734 moved between research installations over several years, Germany to Maryland to Colorado to Nevada. The most recent record, dated 2015, indicated transfer to the Long-Term Observation Wing facility in Nevada Section 4 Level C. The location within this very facility confirmed her suspicions and justified the extreme measures she had taken to position herself for this assignment. Her father might still be alive, held within the Nevada facility for extended observation and potential ongoing experimentation. As her authorized access period neared conclusion, Morgan conducted final searches for any indication of Jack Sullivan's current status or specific location within the facility. Records maintain subject number designation rather than names, suggesting deliberate anonymization to prevent casual discovery of supposedly deceased operators' continued existence. A final document dated 2018 referenced diminished response to standard protocols and cognitive resistance patterns in subject JS-7734, with recommendations for modified containment parameters and enhanced memory suppression techniques. The clinical language concealed horrific implications: her father potentially subjected to mind-altering procedures designed to suppress his identity and resistance to ongoing experimentation. The archivist's return signaled the end of Morgan's access period. She concluded her research with practiced composure, showing appropriate appreciation for the opportunity while revealing nothing of the critical intelligence she had discovered. "Find what you were looking for?" the archivist asked with professional courtesy. "Some context for advanced marksmanship techniques," Morgan replied, maintaining her cover. "Thank you for your assistance." As she exited Building 7, Morgan's mind processed the strategic implications of her discoveries. Her father alive, but potentially held against his will for 15 years. Enhanced medical procedures applied first to whirlwind survivors and potentially others within special operations. Blackwood, Hayes, and others positioned within the operational chain, but with unclear objectives regarding Nighthawk's continued activities. The following morning brought a new training scenario, extended surveillance operation followed by precision engagement from extreme distance. Reynolds outlined tactical parameters with professional precision, assigning team members to observation positions surrounding a mock insurgent compound. Nighthawk, you'll establish here, he said, using the call sign Blackwood had assigned and indicating an elevated position providing comprehensive visibility across the training area. Minimum 12-hour surveillance cataloging all movement patterns and security rotations. Maintain communications discipline throughout observation period. As Morgan established her observation post among rock formations overlooking the training area, she noted increased activity around the research compound, additional security personnel at key access points, specialized equipment being transported through secured entrances, technical staff moving with purposeful efficiency between administrative and research sections. Through her scope, she identified Blackwood's arrival mid-morning. The general's distinctive silver hair, unmistakable as he entered the main research building, accompanied by senior staff members, carrying specialized communication equipment. Movement at primary structure, east entrance. She reported over a tactical radio maintaining cover while continuing observation of both training scenario and facility preparations. 4 individuals establishing security perimeter. Possible leadership arriving within next 30 minutes based on security deployment pattern. The surveillance operation continued throughout the day, providing Morgan extended opportunity to document facility security patterns while demonstrating professional capability in her assigned role. The desert heat built to punishing levels by mid-afternoon, testing endurance and equipment functionality under extreme environmental conditions. Through her scope, Morgan observed medical transport vehicles arriving at a specialized entrance to the research facility. Equipment and personnel consistent with comprehensive evaluation protocols described in the classified documentation. During a break in the surveillance rotation, Morgan's secure communication device vibrated once Reynolds was signaling a private meeting. She found him waiting behind a supply building, his expression grave. "We don't have much time," he said without preamble. "I need to explain myself." Morgan studied him with careful neutrality. "You've been reporting my movements to Blackwood." Reynolds nodded, tension visible in his posture. "Initially, yes. When you first arrived at Fort Bragg, Blackwood asked me to monitor you report anything unusual. I owed him. He pulled strings to save my career after Whirlwind." He hesitated. "But watching you, seeing how you shoot exactly like your father, it's brought everything back." "What exactly are you saying, Master Sergeant?" "I'm saying I think I've been on the wrong side. For 15 years, I've been telling myself we were doing necessary work, advancing capabilities that would save lives." He lowered his voice further. "But what they did to your father, what they're still doing, it isn't right." "And what exactly are they doing?" Morgan pressed, still uncertain of Reynolds' true position. "Project Nighthawk was supposed to be terminated in 2001 by presidential directive. Too many ethical issues, too many legal boundaries crossed. But it went underground instead. The enhanced physical capabilities your father demonstrated during Whirlwind, they wanted to study that, replicate it." Reynolds' expression darkened. "When your father discovered the program was continuing illegally, he gathered evidence, prepared to go to oversight committees. That's why Whirlwind happened. Not a mission gone wrong, a deliberate trap." The confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill through Morgan, despite the desert heat. "And Blackwood's role, complicated. I believe he genuinely regrets what happened to your father. He's been building a case against the program for years, positioning allies in key positions. But he's had to maintain appearances, play both sides." Reynolds met her gaze directly. "Your assignment here wasn't an accident, Morgan. It was orchestrated by Blackwood to give you access to the truth while maintaining plausible deniability for his involvement. Why tell me this now? Because I think your father is still alive, held somewhere in Section 4, and because tomorrow is the annual comprehensive evaluation. All subjects will be transported between sections for testing. The only time they're vulnerable to extraction." He handed her a small data chip. "Building schematics, security protocols, guard rotations. You're not the only one who's been gathering intelligence." Morgan studied Reynolds' face, searching for deception, but finding only the resolution of a man who had finally chosen a side after years of moral compromise. Who else can we trust? Captain Chen is genuine. Her father really did lose his career for asking questions about whirlwind survivors. And Master Sergeant Garrison, he's been working with Blackwood from the outside since retiring last year. He was your father's friend from Green Beret training. The pieces were falling into place. Garrison's reaction to her father's watch, Blackwood's cryptic messages, Chen's unexpected alliance. What's the plan? Tomorrow at 100 hours, your father will be transported from Section 4 to the evaluation center. Garrison has assets in position outside the facility. Chen will create a distraction within the communications center. Reynolds checked his watch. I've already said too much. Maintain normal operational profile. I'll contact you with final details in the morning. As Reynolds departed, Morgan returned to her observation post, mind processing the confirmation of everything she had suspected. Her father alive, a conspiracy spanning 15 years, a network of allies positioned to help her complete what Jack Sullivan had started before Operation Whirlwind. The watch on her wrist seemed to pulse with her accelerated heartbeat. Always vigilant, always watching, and now finally ready to act. As Morgan maintained her surveillance position, Major James Hayes approached, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been broken and imperfectly reassembled. Finding anything interesting? Hayes asked, his voice startling in the silence of the desert afternoon. Morgan maintained her professional demeanor. Standard insurgent rotation patterns, sir. 2-hour shift changes, predictable patrol routes. Vulnerable transition period at dusk. Hayes nodded, studying her with an intensity that went beyond professional assessment. You've been making quite an impression, Sergeant Sullivan. Breaking records at Fort Bragg, making 1,000-meter shots in conditions that defeat our best marksmen, accessing historical archives with unusual focus. The implied surveillance was deliberate, Hayes letting her know she was being watched. Morgan kept her expression neutral. Just trying to learn everything I can, sir. Professional development. Of course. Hayes settled beside her observation position, his eyes scanning the same terrain her scope covered. You know, I met your father once, Operation Whirlwind. I was the intelligence officer who briefed his team before insertion. The revelation created a new connection Morgan hadn't anticipated. Hayes hadn't just been a survivor of Whirlwind. He had been involved in its planning. He asked questions nobody else thought to ask. Hayes continued. Wanted to know about local wind patterns, terrain features that might create unusual air currents. Most operators focus on threats, enemy positions. Your father focused on the invisible, the aspects of the environment others couldn't see or measure. Morgan remained silent, allowing Hayes to continue this unexpected reminiscence. The report said he made 37 confirmed kills in 6 hours in darkness, in driving rain with high winds. Hayes turned to face Morgan directly. No human being should have been capable of that. Yet here you are making shots that defy the same conventional limitations. Like father, like daughter. The statement hung in the air between them, a recognition of her connection to Jack Sullivan that went beyond mere family resemblance. Do you believe in genetic inheritance, Sergeant? The passing of specific traits from parent to child? Not just physical characteristics, but abilities, talents, special gifts. I believe in training, sir, Morgan replied carefully. And practice. Hayes smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Of course, that's the official explanation. But we both know there's more to it than that, don't we? He rose to leave. General Blackwood is particularly interested in tomorrow's demonstration. He rarely takes personal interest in individual operators without specific purpose. As Hayes departed, Morgan remained motionless, processing the implications of their exchange. The facility commander had deliberately acknowledged awareness of her connection to Jack Sullivan, while establishing potential willingness to discuss what lay beneath the official narratives. Whether genuine alliance or sophisticated counterintelligence technique remained unclear, but the interaction confirmed increasing complexity in the network of relationships surrounding her mission. Whatever truth lay buried beneath layers of classification and deliberate concealment, Morgan was closer than ever to uncovering it. The watch on her wrist, her father's watch, seemed to pulse with renewed purpose. Always vigilant, always watching, always moving toward the moment when truth would finally emerge from the shadows. And if her father truly was alive, imprisoned somewhere in Section 4 Level C of this facility, Morgan would find him no matter what it took. Dawn painted the Nevada desert in shades of crimson and gold, the first light of morning casting long shadows across the facility. Morgan Sullivan finished her equipment check with practiced precision, her mind focused on the mission that lay ahead. 15 years of searching, training, and positioning had led to this moment. She froze as the facility-wide announcement system crackled to life. Attention all personnel, Nighthawk comprehensive evaluation procedures now in effect. Section access restrictions activated. All authorized staff report to designated stations. Morgan's pulse quickened, though her exterior remained composed. The timing aligned perfectly with the documentation she had discovered today was the scheduled evaluation of all Nighthawk subjects, including her father. A window of opportunity opening within a fortress designed to prevent exactly what she planned. Reynolds approached her observation position, his movement betraying unusual tension. "Nighthawk, you're on Overwatch today," he said, using her assigned call sign with deliberate emphasis. "Establish position here." He indicated a rocky outcropping that provided exceptional visibility of both the training area and, not coincidentally, the medical transport route between Section 4 and the evaluation center. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Morgan accepted the assignment without revealing her recognition of its strategic value. Reynolds was positioning her precisely where she needed to be. "Standard surveillance protocol," he continued loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Then his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Watch the medical transports. Third rotation, 1100 hours. Subject JS 7734. The explicit reference to her father's designated number sent a jolt through Morgan's system. Reynolds wasn't just aware of the situation, he was actively facilitating her mission. Before she could respond, he was already walking away, maintaining the appearance of routine operational briefing. Morgan established her position with methodical efficiency, setting up her rifle and surveillance equipment while conducting continuous assessment of the facility's activity patterns. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness, establishing additional checkpoints around Section 4 and the evaluation center. Medical staff in white coats carried specialized equipment between buildings, their movements suggesting urgent preparation. At precisely 0900 hours, the first transport began, a wheelchair-bound subject escorted by armed guards and medical personnel moving from Section 4 to the evaluation center. Through her scope, Morgan observed a middle-aged man with vacant eyes, his muscular frame suggesting military background, despite his current diminished state. "Movement at designated observation point," she reported over the tactical radio, maintaining her cover while documenting the transport procedures. "Subject under escort, 4-man security detail. Medical personnel with monitoring equipment." "Copy, Nighthawk," Reynolds acknowledged. "Continue observation." The pattern repeated every 30 minutes, another subject transported along the same route, each with similar security protocols, but varying medical equipment. Morgan documented each movement, building a comprehensive understanding of timing, personnel rotations, and security response capabilities. At 10:55 hours, she activated the secure communication device concealed within her father's watch, transmitting a coded signal to Garrison. The message was simple confirmation of target identification imminent, extraction window approaching. 5 minutes later, the sixth transport began. This one different from the others, enhanced security detail, additional medical personnel, specialized restraint system on the transport chair. Through her scope, Morgan focused on the subject's face, and her breath caught in her throat. Though aged by 15 years of captivity, the man's features were unmistakable. The same strong jawline she saw in the mirror each morning, the same weathered creases around the eyes. Her father, Jack Sullivan, now in his mid-50s, being transported like a dangerous specimen rather than the decorated soldier he had been. Even from this distance, she could see the alertness in his eyes that contrasted sharply with the vacant stares of previous subjects. Despite whatever they had done to him, Jack Sullivan remained conscious, aware, present, watching, always vigilant. Morgan maintained her professional composure, though her heart pounded against her ribcage. "Transport 6 underway," she reported calmly. "Enhanced security protocols. High-value subject assessment." Through her scope, she observed her father's head turn slightly in her direction, as if sensing observation beyond the ordinary. For a brief moment, their eyes seemed to connect across the distance, an impossible recognition, yet somehow tangible. As the transport disappeared into the evaluation center, Morgan transmitted the final confirmation signal to Garrison. The message contained minimal data, subject identified, extraction protocol, authorized timeline accelerated. The response came within seconds. Assets deploying diversion initiated at 11:30, communication disruption at 32, extraction window 11:32, 11:45. 13 minutes to change 15 years of history. Morgan used the remaining time to memorize security positions, identify potential choke points, and calculate optimal movement paths between her current location and the evaluation center. The facility's layout had become a three-dimensional map in her mind, with every corridor, doorway, and security checkpoint precisely located. At exactly 11:30 hours, an explosion rocked the southern perimeter of the facility. Alarms blared as black smoke billowed into the desert sky. Security personnel responded immediately, units converging on the apparent breach point, communication channels filling with urgent status reports. 2 minutes later, as predicted, the facility's primary communication systems failed. Radio channels filled with static, automated security systems reverted to localized control protocols, coordination between security elements, fractured by precise electronic warfare targeting critical command nodes. Morgan secured her surveillance equipment and moved with controlled urgency toward the evaluation center. The chaos created by the diversion and communications failure provided perfect cover for her approach. Security personnel focused on the perimeter breach rather than internal movement. As she neared the medical complex, Reynolds appeared from behind a supply building, his expression grim but determined. 30 seconds during transfer from evaluation to containment, he said without preamble. Rear entrance, minimal security due to personnel reallocation. Extraction team approaching from maintenance tunnels. You knew all along, Morgan said, studying the man who had served with her father. Reynolds checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. Your father saved my life twice, once in Afghanistan and once here when I was scheduled for evaluation. I owe him everything. He met her gaze directly. He never stopped fighting, never stopped resisting their procedures. 15 years of cognitive conditioning, and he still remembers who he is, who you are. Before Morgan could respond, gunfire erupted from the direction of the perimeter breach. The diversion was escalating, drawing even more security assets away from the central complex. Now or never, Reynolds said, moving toward the evaluation center's rear entrance. They approached with tactical precision, using buildings and vehicles for cover. As predicted, the rear entrance had minimal security, 2 guards remaining where there would normally be 6, their attention divided between their post and the chaos unfolding across the facility. Reynolds took position behind a parked transport, providing overwatch as Morgan circled to approach from the blind spot in the facility's camera coverage. The first guard fell silently to a precisely applied chokehold, unconscious, before he could trigger an alarm. The second turned at the sound of movement, but too late. Morgan's strike to his carotid sinus dropped him instantly. Inside the evaluation center was a stark contrast to the desert heat, sterile cold with the antiseptic smell of a medical facility overlaid with something else, something chemical and vaguely metallic. The corridors were surprisingly empty, most personnel having responded to emergency protocols. Morgan and Reynolds moved with practiced efficiency, clearing corners and maintaining situational awareness as they penetrated deeper into the facility. Through a reinforced observation window, Morgan caught glimpses of laboratory equipment, medical monitoring systems, and restraint chairs designed for subjects undergoing evaluation. They found her father in a post-assessment recovery room, strapped to a specialized gurney, medical equipment, monitoring his vital signs. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, sedated but not deeply. As Morgan approached, Jack Sullivan's eyes snapped open with startling awareness. They focused on her face with an intensity that transcended the drugs in his system. Morgan, he whispered her name, a question and an answer in a single word. I'm here, she replied, working to release the restraints while Reynolds secured the door. I'm getting you out. A flash of clarity crossed her father's eyes, followed by confusion, then determination. How did you find me? Morgan freed the last restraint and helped him to a sitting position. I was always watching Dad, just like you taught me. Recognition bloomed in his eyes. 15 years of captivity, experimentation, and memory suppression peeled away in an instant of connection. His hand moved automatically to his empty wrist. My watch. Morgan showed him the Rolex on her own wrist. Always vigilant. The moment of reunion was broken by Reynolds' urgent warning. Company coming. We need to move. Now. Morgan helped her father to his feet. Despite 15 years of captivity and whatever procedures they had subjected him to, Jack Sullivan's frame remained solid, his movements betraying the muscle memory of a lifetime operator. Can you walk? She asked. Jack's eyes cleared further, the effects of sedation battling with decades of special operations training and sheer determination. I can do more than walk, he said, his voice gaining strength. Reynolds tossed him a sidearm retrieved from the unconscious guard. Jack caught it with surprising dexterity, checking the magazine and action with movements that 15 years of captivity hadn't erased. Extraction team should be in position by now, Reynolds said, checking the quarter. Maintenance tunnel access is 50 meters east. It's our best shot. They moved through the facility with tactical precision, Jack Sullivan regaining more coordination and awareness with each passing minute. Morgan maintained close security coverage, marveling at how quickly her father was overcoming what must have been powerful sedatives. They've been conditioning me for years, Jack explained in a whispered response to her unasked question. My system processes the drugs faster each time, part of what they were studying. As they approached the maintenance access point, the facility's backup generators engaged emergency lighting, casting harsh shadows across the corridor. The alarm shifted from the general alert of the perimeter breach to a more specific pattern. Subject containment breach, Reynolds translated, his expression grim. They know. Ahead, the corridor intersection filled with armed security personnel, their weapons trained on the approaching trio. Behind them, more guards converged, cutting off retreat. Stand down. The command came from Major James Hayes, emerging from behind the security line, his sidearm aimed directly at them. You have nowhere to go. Morgan and Reynolds took defensive positions, using a structural column for partial cover, while shielding Jack between them. A tense standoff developed, neither side willing to initiate the firefight that would likely kill everyone in the confined space. You don't understand what you're doing, Hayes said, his voice carrying the conviction of a true believer. Project Nighthawk is creating the next evolution of Warrior. Enhanced capabilities, accelerated healing, extended operational longevity. We're protecting America's future. By kidnapping soldiers, Morgan challenged, by faking deaths and conducting unauthorized experiments. By doing what's necessary, Hayes countered. Your father has a genetic profile seen in less than 0.001% of the population. Natural enhanced capabilities that we've spent decades trying to replicate. He's too valuable to lose. Jack Sullivan stepped forward, his movement steadier than seemed possible given his condition minutes earlier. I volunteered to serve my country, James. I never volunteered to be a lab rat. None of us did. Hayes' expression hardened. Sometimes soldiers don't get to choose their most important missions. This isn't about national security, Jack said, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of observation from inside the program. It's about power, control, creating assets that operate outside legal constraints. I saw the deployment files before Whirlwind. Nighthawk subjects used for unauthorized operations, political assassinations, actions specifically prohibited by executive order. Hayes' finger tightened on the trigger. Stand down, Sullivan. You're going back to containment. Your daughter and Reynolds are going to disappear. Training accidents happen all the time. The security team tensed, preparing to execute whatever orders Hayes gave. Morgan calculated their options, each scenario ending with unacceptable casualties. That's enough, James. The new voice came from behind the security line. The guards parted, revealing Colonel Richard Hayes, the major's older brother, his service pistol aimed not at Morgan or her father, but at James. Colonel, James Hayes' voice carried shock and betrayal. What are you doing here? Cleaning up a mess that should have been handled years ago, Richard Hayes replied, his voice carrying the burden of a long-delayed moral reckoning. Project Nighthawk was ordered terminated by presidential directive in 2001. What you're doing here isn't just unethical, it's illegal. We're protecting our country. We're violating everything our country stands for. Richard cut him off. Stand down. The tension in the corridor stretched to breaking point. Brother against brother, security forces caught between conflicting commands from superior officers, Morgan and Reynolds, poised to protect Jack at all costs. For a moment it seemed James would order his men to fire despite his brother's intervention. Then his shoulders slumped fractionally. Security team, stand down. He ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. As the guards lowered their weapons, a new commotion erupted from the far end of the corridor. The extraction team had arrived, led by a figure Morgan recognized immediately. The retired Master Sergeant Garrison, now in civilian tactical gear, moved with the efficiency of a man half his age, his team securing the corridor with practiced precision. "Time to go, kids," he called. "Our window's closing fast." With Richard Hayes maintaining control over his brother and the security team, Morgan, Jack, and Reynolds moved quickly toward the extraction team. The maintenance tunnels beyond offered a clear route to the facility's perimeter, where additional assets waited with transportation. "Why more?" James Hayes called after his brother. "Why betray everything we've built?" Richard Hayes looked at his younger brother with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Because I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to Project Nighthawk. Because men like Jack Sullivan deserve better than to be treated as property of the state." He paused. "And because after watching his daughter break every record we had, I realized we've been looking at this all wrong. Whatever makes the Sullivans special, it's not something you can replicate in a lab or transfer through chemical procedures. It's something else entirely." As they moved through the maintenance tunnels, Garrison briefed them on the extraction plan. Transport vehicle waiting half a mile from the eastern perimeter. Aerial extraction 20 minutes later from designated coordinates. This whole place will be locked down tight within the hour. Jack Sullivan moved with increasing strength, his body burning through the sedatives with unnatural speed, the same enhanced physiological responses that had made him such a valuable subject to Project Nighthawk. "How many others?" he asked Garrison. "How many are still being held?" 17, according to our intelligence, Garrison replied. "All officially KIA from various operations, all with similar genetic markers to yours." "We can't leave them," Jack said firmly. "We're not," Garrison assured him. "Colonel Hayes is implementing Phase 2 as we speak, official recognition of illegal continuation, immediate termination of the program medical evaluation, and release of all subjects. This isn't just a rescue mission, it's a complete shutdown." They emerged from the tunnels into the harsh Nevada sunlight, the desert heat a shock after the climate-controlled facility. A modified tactical vehicle waited, as promised, its engine, running driver scanning for threats. As they approached the vehicle, shots rang out from behind them. James Hayes had broken free from his brother's custody and pursued them, his face contorted with the rage of a true believer, seeing his life's work destroyed. "You can't stop this," he shouted, firing again. "The program is too important." Morgan pushed her father toward the vehicle while spinning to return fire, her movement practiced and precise. But before she could squeeze the trigger, Jack Sullivan stepped in front of her, his expression resolute. "Get to the vehicle," he ordered, the command carrying the authority of decades of special operations leadership. "This is between James and me." "Dad, trust me," he said, his eyes clear and focused. "I've been waiting 15 years for this moment." Morgan hesitated, then complied, moving toward the extraction vehicle while maintaining cover position. Jack turned to face James Hayes, standing unarmed in the desert sun. "It's over, James," he called. "Let it go." "It will never be over," Hayes snarled, advancing with his weapon raised. "You're too valuable. The program is too important. The next generation of warriors are not made in laboratories," Jack finished for him. "They're forged through training, commitment, and choice." He glanced briefly at Morgan. "And sometimes they're born with gifts we don't fully understand." Hayes fired again, the shot going wide as his emotional state affected his aim. "I can't let you leave." Jack stood his ground, seemingly unconcerned by the armed man approaching him. "You spent 15 years studying me, James. You should know better." What happened next occurred with such speed that Morgan could barely track it. As Hayes closed to within 10 meters, Jack Sullivan moved with impossible quickness, closing the distance, disarming the major with a precise strike, and rendering him unconscious with a technique that spoke to decades of hand-to-hand combat training, enhanced by whatever procedures Nighthawk had subjected him to. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Jack stood over the unconscious form of his former captor, breathing heavily not from exertion, but from the emotional weight of the moment. 15 years of captivity ended with a demonstration of exactly why Project Nighthawk had valued him so highly. "Dad," Morgan called urgently, "we need to move." Jack nodded, retrieving Hayes' weapon before jogging to the waiting vehicle. As they sped away from the facility, alarm systems continued to blare behind them, the chaos of the orchestrated breach providing crucial cover for their escape. Inside the vehicle, Jack studied his daughter's face with the wonder of a man given back something he had thought lost forever. "You found me," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "After all this time." Morgan handed him his watch, the band worn, but the mechanism still functioning perfectly. "I never stopped looking." Jack turned the timepiece over, running his thumb across the engraving on the back. "Always vigilant," he murmured, then looked up at Reynolds. "You helped her." Reynolds nodded, his expression solemn. "I owed you, Lieutenant. We all did. 9 lives in Afghanistan, and then mine again, when they were going to transfer me to deep containment after I started asking questions." "How many know?" Jack asked. "About the program, about what they were doing to us." "Too many for them to silence now," Garrison interjected from the front seat. "General Blackwood has been building a case for years, gathering evidence, positioning key personnel. Your daughter's assignment to Fort Bragg wasn't an accident, it was the final piece." Jack turned to Morgan, comprehension dawning. "Blackwood sent you. He created the position," she explained, "made sure I was assigned to it. He knew who I was, what I could do. He needed someone with personal motivation and the right skills to penetrate the program's security." Blackwood, Jack said, the name carrying complex emotions. "He was theater commander during Whirlwind. He authorized the mission. And he spent 15 years trying to make it right," Garrison added. "Some debts can't be repaid, but he's tried. The program had too many powerful protectors in Washington. He couldn't move openly until now, until we had irrefutable evidence and the right leverage." The vehicle crested a ridge, revealing a small clearing where a black helicopter waited, rotors already spinning in preparation for immediate departure. Standing beside it was a tall, silver-haired figure that Morgan recognized immediately. "Speak of the devil," Reynolds murmured. As they approached the landing zone, General Walter Blackwood stood with military erectness. Despite his age, his pale eyes fixed on their approaching vehicle. When they stopped, he stepped forward to meet them, his expression a complex mixture of relief, guilt, and resolution. Jack Sullivan emerged from the vehicle, slowly standing at his full height as he faced the man who had been his commanding officer 15 years earlier. The two men studied each other in silence, one bearing the physical markers of 15 years of captivity, the other the burden of 15 years of knowledge and inaction. "Sullivan," Blackwood said finally, his voice carrying over the helicopter's engine noise. "General," Jack acknowledged, neither saluting nor offering his hand. The tension between them was palpable. "I owe you an explanation," Blackwood began. "You owe me 15 years," Jack corrected, his voice even despite the weight of accusation. Blackwood nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Yes, and I can never give those back." He glanced at Morgan, then back to Jack. "But I hope what comes next will at least begin to balance the scales." "Which is?" "The complete dismantling of Project Nighthawk, the release of all subjects, full disclosure to congressional oversight committees, and your testimony at the center of it all." Jack studied the general with the assessment of a man who had survived 15 years of captivity by reading the intentions of those around him. "Why now? Why not years ago?" "Because until now, I couldn't guarantee success," Blackwood replied honestly. "The program had too many protectors in Washington, too many believers in the military hierarchy. I needed irrefutable evidence and the right pressure points. I needed," he glanced at Morgan again, "the right assets in the right positions." "You used my daughter," Jack said, his voice hardening. "I created an opportunity," Blackwood countered. "She chose to take it, just as she chose to become a Marine, to attend Scout Sniper School, to follow in your footsteps. The Sullivan determination seems to run in the family." Before Jack could respond, the facility's sirens changed tone in the distance, the containment breach protocols shifting to full facility lockdown. "We need to move," Garrison urged. "Explanations can wait until we're clear." As they boarded the helicopter, Jack placed a hand on Morgan's shoulder, pride evident in his eyes despite the circumstances. "You did this," he said. "You never gave up." "Like father, like daughter," she replied. The helicopter lifted off as security vehicles from the facility appeared on the horizon, too late to prevent the extraction, but evidence of how quickly the response was escalating. As they gained altitude and speed, Morgan watched the Nevada desert fall away beneath them, the secret facility growing smaller in the distance. Beside her, Jack Sullivan studied his watch, the timepiece that had connected them across 15 years of separation. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you know I was still alive?" I didn't, Morgan admitted. Not for certain. But there were inconsistencies in the report's details that didn't align. And then there was this. She pulled out the small leather notebook containing her father's notes, including the encrypted messages about Project Nighthawk. Jack took the notebook with reverence, his fingers tracing the familiar pages. You decoded it. On my 18th birthday, your letter said, "The truth is in the watching." It took me years to understand what you meant, that you'd hidden the truth in the notebook for me to find when I was ready. Jack nodded, memory returning with increasing clarity as the drugs continued to leave his system. I discovered what they were doing using enhanced soldiers for operations outside legal parameters. Political assassinations, deniable operations specifically prohibited by executive order. I was preparing evidence for congressional oversight when they sent us into that valley. He looked at Blackwood. Into an ambush. Blackwood met his gaze without flinching. I didn't know about the ambush, but I suspected something was wrong with the intelligence. I should have canceled the operation. But you needed to see what I could do, Jack said, understanding dawning. You needed confirmation of what Project Nighthawk had been reporting about my capabilities. I was wrong, Blackwood acknowledged, and 9 men nearly died because of it. You saved them, and in doing so, provided exactly the demonstration that the project's administrators wanted. 37 confirmed kills in impossible conditions, Reynolds interjected. No human should have been capable of that. But you were. Jack turned the watch over in his hands, studying the engraving that had become his mantra. I knew they would come for me after the operation. I knew what they wanted, so I prepared the notebook, the watch, the encrypted messages. A breadcrumb trail for Morgan to follow when she was old enough. He looked at his daughter with pride mixed with regret. I never wanted this life for you. It was my choice, Morgan said firmly. As the helicopter continued toward the extraction coordinates, where a larger aircraft waited to transport them to a secure location, Jack Sullivan leaned back 15 years of captivity, giving way to exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. What happens now? He asked, his question directed at Blackwood. Debriefing at a secure facility, the general replied. Medical evaluation to assess what they did to you and begin reversal procedures where possible. Then preparation for congressional testimony. Project Nighthawk will be exposed, its administrators held accountable. He paused. After that, it's up to you. Jack looked at Morgan, then back to Blackwood. I've lost 15 years with my daughter. I don't intend to lose any more. 3 months later, Morgan Sullivan stood before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, her testimony about Project Nighthawk, the culmination of a mission that had defined her adult life. Behind closed doors, she detailed everything: her discovery of her father's encrypted messages, her deliberate career path designed to position her for access to classified information, and finally the rescue operation that had exposed one of the military's darkest secrets. Jack Sullivan had testified the previous day, his first-hand account of 15 years, as an unwilling test subject creating shockwaves through the political and military establishments. His detailed documentation of unauthorized operations conducted by Nighthawk assets had triggered multiple investigations into potential violations of domestic and international law. As Morgan concluded her testimony, Senator Elizabeth Warren leaned forward, her expression grave. Sergeant Sullivan, your actions revealed a program operating outside legal authority for nearly 2 decades. You've demonstrated exceptional courage. What do you believe should happen to those responsible? Morgan considered the question carefully. Those who violated their oaths should be held accountable, Senator. But more importantly, we need to ensure this never happens again. The 17 men who were held against their will deserve justice, compensation, and the chance to rebuild their lives. After the hearing, Morgan found her father waiting in a secure anteroom, his appearance transformed from the captive she had rescued 3 months earlier. Proper nutrition, medical treatment, and freedom had restored much of what 15 years of confinement had taken. His eyes, however, still carried the watchfulness that had kept him alive and sane during his captivity. How did it go? He asked. They listened, Morgan replied. Really listened. Blackwood's evidence combined with yours and the medical documentation leaves no room for denial. Jack nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. And after this, what's next for you? The question carried weight beyond its simplicity, a father trying to understand the woman his daughter had become during their 15 years of separation. I've requested extended leave, Morgan said. Thought I might spend some time in Montana. There's a plot of land there that belonged to Mom. Seems like a good place to decompress. Learn to be a civilian again. She paused. Could use some company if you're interested. Jack's weathered face broke into a genuine smile, perhaps the first since his rescue. I'd like that. As they exited the secure government building, the Washington autumn painted the trees in vibrant colors that contrasted sharply with the sterile environments they had both inhabited for too long. Morgan in military installations, Jack in the clinical confines of Project Nighthawk. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, Jack said as they walked. That last shot you made in Nevada, the 1-800-meter engagement in heat mirage and crosswinds. How did you make that shot? Morgan glanced at her father, seeing in his eyes the same question Reynolds had asked her, the recognition of capabilities that transcended conventional explanation. The same way you made 37 kills in 6 hours during Operation Whirlwind, she replied. I watched, not just through the scope, with everything I had. Jack nodded, understanding, passing between them, that required no further explanation. Whatever made the Sullivans special, it wasn't something Project Nighthawk could replicate in a laboratory. It was something deeper, something passed from father to daughter through bonds that even 15 years of separation couldn't break. Always vigilant, he said, tapping the watch now returned to his wrist. Always, Morgan agreed. As they continued walking, the autumn sun glinted off the face of Jack Sullivan's Rolex Submariner, the engraving on its back no longer just a reminder of what had been lost, but a testament to what had been found. The ghost protocol that had kept Jack Sullivan alive through 15 years of captivity and guided his daughter to him when all seemed lost, always vigilant, always watching, always moving toward the moment when justice would finally be served and truth revealed. In a private office at the Pentagon, the aftermath of Project Nighthawk continued to unfold. General Blackwood sat across from Captain Sarah Chen, reviewing the classified summaries of the ongoing investigations. Your father would be proud, he said, closing the file. His observations about the Whirlwind survivors were what first raised questions about the program's continuation. Chen nodded, her expression reflecting the complex emotions of a personal mission finally completed. 15 years of career exile at Antarctica Station. He deserved better. They all did, Blackwood agreed. Sullivan, the other subjects, the families told their loved ones died in service. What will happen to Major Hayes? Chen asked. Military tribunal, likely prison time. Blackwood sighed heavily. His brother Richard has resigned his commission. He'll testify against the program, but the guilt of his complicity weighs heavily. And Reynolds, full immunity in exchange for testimony. His assistance in the rescue operation counts for a lot. Blackwood studied Chen thoughtfully. The Oversight Committee was impressed with your intelligence work. There's a deputy director position opening in the new Ethics Compliance Division. Chen raised an eyebrow. Watchdogs watching the watchdogs. Something like that, Blackwood confirmed. Someone needs to ensure nothing like Nighthawk happens again. As they concluded their meeting, Blackwood remained at his desk, contemplating the framed photograph of a young lieutenant receiving a Silver Star decades earlier. Jack Sullivan stood at attention, his eyes already carrying the watchfulness that would define his life and save him during 15 years of captivity. The general touched the frame briefly, a gesture of respect for a man whose extraordinary abilities had nearly cost him everything, and whose daughter had shown the same remarkable gifts in bringing him home. Always vigilant, Blackwood murmured to the empty room in acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid but had at least begun to be addressed. In Montana, on a remote piece of land bordered by mountains and forest, Jack and Morgan Sullivan began building something new. A cabin took shape under their hands, father and daughter working side by side, making up for lost years, with each piece of lumber, each nail driven home. They didn't speak often of Project Nighthawk, of the years of separation, of the extraordinary abilities that had both condemned and saved Jack. Instead, they focused on the present, on healing, on rebuilding, on learning to be family again. But each morning they would meet on the cabin's porch at dawn, watching the sun rise over the mountains. And without fail, Jack's hand would move to the Rolex on his wrist, his thumb tracing the engraving that had connected them across 15 years and thousands of miles. Always vigilant, a family motto, a survival strategy, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. And in the mountains around them, in the play of light and shadow across the forest, in the subtle shift of wind patterns that others would never notice, but that both Sullivans could read like an open book, the world continued to reveal its secrets to those who knew how to truly watch, not just through the scope, but with everything they had.